All right, yeah. We'll be starting right away. So today, just like the just like what is on screen is showing, we'll be going through React.js and APIs. It's going to be a mixed session. We'll be looking a bit of about theory with React.js since we just introduced it yesterday, and also looking at APIs and how we can index data from APIs, yes. But specifically, we won't be looking at just any API. We'll be looking at APIs for blockchain data because later on we'll be needing that information when we write smart contracts and want to get to query the state of these smart contracts and even understanding the status of the blockchains that we're going to be building on top of. So we'll be looking at specifically data indexing for APIs, data indexing for Web3 information, blockchain data. Okay, so maybe just to look at React as our very first component of this session. So I think yesterday we looked at React, but only introduced it. So I want to explain a few things in regarding how React works. So meanwhile, as I do that, let me start a new application, a React app, so that we don't waste time waiting on it to install components, rather dependencies. So I'm going to do this on a desktop. I hope my screen is visible enough. All right. Let me create a folder here. I'll call it codes 2. So this is where we're going to be doing our work. Okay, so this is a folder, and if you remember from yesterday's session how to create a React app, it is quite simple. The command is npm create, depending on the bundler that you're going to use. For instance, now I'll be using Vite. I would say npm create Vite at latest. So this would create for you a Vite application, a React application using Vite as the bundler, and install the packages that you need for you to run that application. And you can find all this information on the React website. React. Everything about how you can actually start an application, explaining the different components of React. All that information is right here on the React site. So there's somewhere where you can have a quick start. I think it might have been on the page this side, quick start. How to create. Installation is right here. Create a React app. Okay. You can see there's this option when you're using Next.js. But I think your React app from scratch. Yeah, could use this npm create Vite at latest. And these other parameters are really just for you to specify the name of the application, but we're going to also do it in a different way, in a way that I think is more efficient. So when I end with this and I press enter, it would initialize an application and then require me to give the application a name. So I'm going to call it data indexing. And it has to be in lowercase. So if you use any uppercase character here, it would raise an error. I could try that and see what happens. Data indexing. So I can use the framework and choose the framework that I want to use. So there's a number of frameworks that you can use to write applications with JavaScript. You can use Vanilla.js, or you can use Vue. Vue is also a framework like React for writing applications. You can use React, you can use Svelte. There's all these other frameworks, but particularly I'll be using React. So it's doing that because I needed to zoom out. So you can choose from this list what you would use, what framework you want to use. But I particularly want to use React. When I click React, then it shows me all the different variants of React that I would be using. Either TypeScript. So TypeScript is a statically typed alternative of JavaScript. That means if you define variables like we're looking at them in JavaScript, you need to specify the specific data type of the values that variable will store. And there are a number of other things around how TypeScript works, but it's essentially JavaScript with more stricter rules. I think that's the best definition of it. So particularly, I prefer to use JavaScript with Speedy Web Compiler. It is just an alternative to all the other compilers of how JavaScript bundles and displays the information for you in the browser. So I don't want to use this an updated version of Vite. It is still in beta, so I'll use the one that is already stabler, and yeah, so we don't have any issues. So it will install the dependencies for us. What this means is that for a React application to run, there are certain things it needs to have as components that support the application, a default application, React application, and those are the things that it's installing now. So yeah, meanwhile as it does that, we could talk about React from here. So essentially how React differs from vanilla JavaScript is that it works as it is a much easier, more efficient framework compared to plain JavaScript. Can you all see my presentation? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm sharing my screen wrongly. Okay. So yes, from what I see here, sorry, it was just an issue with the way my screen was displaying. Now, how React works is that it uses components. So a component is just the entry point into the browser for a React application. So for instance, when you're loading an application that has been built in React, everything that you want to display on the browser, you must put it inside a component. So what is a component? So a component is just a function, like you saw in JavaScript as you were looking at it. It is just a function. But this function has special characteristics that it returns JSX. So JSX is a special syntax, like an advancement of JavaScript that is optimized for displaying HTML pages on the browser that are written in a language that is like JavaScript. So a component, like I was saying, is from the definition here, it says a self-contained reusable unit of UI. Self-contained means that even if you didn't add anything from the outside environment, it is sufficient in itself to display information on the browser. You remember when we were working with vanilla JavaScript and HTML, for us to have any logic that dynamically optimized or modified the browser, we had to import JavaScript through an external script. We had to import CSS through an external CSS file. Or even if we wrote them in within the HTML framework itself, there were independent components. JavaScript would come independently through a script, CSS would come independently through a style tag, and then HTML would also be independent. So it was like bringing three things together to be able to display on the interface. With a component in React, the difference is that it is self-sufficient. That means if I write a full component, it has capacity to display everything on the interface and also to contain the logic that I can use to modify the display on the interface without me having to have any file depending on that the component depends on from outside. So that's what it means when it says it's self-contained. And it's essentially JavaScript, only that it's expressed in a language used JSX to display information on the interface. So what is JSX? So it's a syntax extension of JavaScript, and it is used. It's actually JavaScript, but it has a syntax that looks similar to HTML. The purpose of it is simply to display components or elements on the interface. So moving forward, okay, my application already started. Okay, so open it here. Now, by default, when you start a React application using Write, it installs the packages, then starts the application, runs it on a local server. Okay, you can see it says starting dev server, and then this is the port at which you can find that application running on the local server. So I just have to load that page here for me to be able to see that information. So this is the application. Now, when I open the application in code, in a code editor, so I closed it so I could be able to open it in a code editor. Okay, so open it in VS Code, and then I'll restart the application. Actually, I'll keep this terminal instance open, so I can use it later on to probably install certain things. Okay, so it created a folder for the application. I just had to open the folder. Just a moment. Where is it? I think I named it cohort 2. Yeah, it's this one. So when I check cohort 2, oh, it's empty. So I installed the application in the other one. I wanted to install it in this, so let me redo it. The command is npm create. It won't take long. Yes, so the application name, I wanted it to be data indexing. Okay, let me first zoom out. Don't worry about this, I'm doing exactly the same thing we did earlier on. So I'll be using React. Okay, so it's now installing in the correct folder, so you should just wait on it. So like I was saying, okay, data indexing. So this is not exactly the file that I wanted, but let's wait for it to install. Meanwhile, so that's what defines a component in React, and this is how it looks like. So like I said, it's a function, like you can see here. If you've been through the JavaScript class that was done earlier, you remember this is the syntax of a function. You start with a function keyword, then the function name, then the parentheses for where you define your parameters, and then the script block where you put the logic that will depend on those parameters to do certain things. So now this is what JSX looks like. It is essentially JavaScript, rather HTML, but it's actually JavaScript under the hood. So when you look at it, it actually looks like HTML. Under the hood, it's JavaScript, in other words. So this is what they call JSX, and it's what is returned from a component for it to be able to operate. And now this is what is displayed on your interface, and here, this is called the body. Before the return method, what is put here is the logic, the JavaScript logic, the actual logic that you're going to use in your application. And then down here, you display the JSX. So like it said, it looks like HTML from here. So it's a JavaScript extension. Okay. And We're going to actually see how we can do that when we modify this application. Okay, I think now we're loading the correct application, but I want to open it. So when I come to this folder, this is where the application is, Treats Data Indexing. So I have to change into this folder. Then I'll open it in VS Code. Yeah, hopefully my screen is visible. So like we're looking at it yesterday, the entry point into a React application is app.jsx. Of course, there are other dependencies there. There's a file called main.jsx where the application is rendered before it's displayed on the interface. So it's rendered and then converted into a basic HTML file. As you can see here, this script depends on main.jsx. And you remember when I was talking about JSX, I said it's actual JavaScript. So how you know it's actual JavaScript is it renders into a script module. So that is how it's converted into the data that you see on the interface. But all this information, everything that is within this main.jsx file, this src file, is right here. And you can see, yes please. Is there a question? The definition of the word? Render. So in the context of an application, what rendering means is bringing different components together into one thing. So in this case, we're going to see where I actually mentioned render. As you can see here, there's a number of inputs. How many inputs do we see here? There are 4 inputs, right? So what that means is that all these 4 things have to be brought together into a single application. This is just a depiction of what rendering means. So these are 4 different inputs, and all these inputs are going to be used in creating the application that we eventually see on the browser interface. So rendering is simply bringing all different components together into one single functional component that can actually be displayed on the interface. And as you can see here, we actually use the method render for us to render the application up here. Now, all the information in here up. So app is a component, and this is how a component is displayed. We're going to see it further. So it looks at what a component looks like when you're defining it. Now this is what a component looks like when you import it from somewhere else. So as you can see, it was imported from the file app.jsx. And which component did we import? The component app. Okay, when I come to app, you can see it's actually defined like a function. So I'm going to try to comment this out, everything in here. Maybe I'm going to actually delete it so that we can be able to have a clear view of what is actually happening here. Okay, I remove this so I can demonstrate it well. And this. Then I'll explain what the rest of these are. So all this information you see here is what eventually displays here. So we're going to remove one by one and see what happens. So for instance, I want to start with an image here. Let me comment it out and see what happens to the interface. Then I reload it. So it can be reached. I didn't restart it. Oh, yeah, I didn't. So I'm going to start it here instead. npm run dev. So this is the command that starts a server for that specific application. And it will be running at this port. So it's the same port here. I just have to reload it. Oh, it says there's an error. What's the error? Let me remove this. So this is the application that we see on the interface. So let me first comment this out, the image itself. When I comment it out, it shows me an error unterminated. Okay. Let me remove both these. So you can see the images actually disappear because this was JSX code that was creating those images, rather displaying those images. So a React application has very simple rules, and I'm going to recreate it. I'm going to remove a React component rather. So I'm going to remove this, and it might actually raise an error now, so that I can recreate it and define for you. So it's empty now, there's nothing displaying. There's essentially nothing in app.jsx. Okay. So you can see the error it reads here. It says the module src/app.jsx does not provide an export named default. So this is something critical, and we're going to explain it. I'm going to explain it. Every component, like we said, a component is the entry point into the display element of on the browser for React app. So how you define a component? We said it's a function, so we're going to define it. Let's actually use this very same example. Someone's microphone is on. Aaron Epaja. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to define it using this syntax, rather this very example, but I'll call it a specific name, function. I'll call it app, and I'll explain why. So we deleted a function, rather a component called app from this file, app.jsx, and there was a file here that was depending on that component. You see, it was importing it from app.jsx, and it was importing the component app. So that's why I want to replace it with the same name so that we don't have conflicts. So it's a basic function. Now we're defining a component. This is the functional unit of a React application. Let me comment it here. Functional unit of a React app. So it's a basic function. That's where you put the parameters, and that's where you put your custom logic. The question? Yes. Yes. I'm only maintaining the name because I removed. Please mute. No, they don't have to be the same names. The name of the file and then the name of the component. You could use another name. Yeah, we're going to see everything. I'm only using these defaults because they have a lot of dependencies down the line, and I don't want to keep changing everything. That's why I'm maintaining the name here. But I'm going to create custom components, custom files. Okay, so this is where we put parameters. That would ideally be called properties, and maybe we'll look at that down the line, probably tomorrow. Then this is where you put the custom logic, including the return function, where you put the information that you're going to display. So here you put the custom JavaScript logic. We're going to see how we can use that. Then inside here, inside these parentheses after the return keyword. This is where you put the display elements. So now that's what a component looks like. It has a place where you put the custom logic and a place where you put the display elements that are going to depend on this custom logic. Okay, so let's start with something basic. Let's do this very exact thing. Now, the simple rule is inside here, inside these parentheses of the return function, there has to be one global element. It can be a container like that, or it can be a React fragment, something that just has tags, closing and ending tag. Now, inside this return function and inside these tags, which could be a div or a React component, a React fragment. This is called a React fragment, or it could be a div. So I'm going to be using a div. Okay. Now this is the architecture of a React component. That's how it looks like. Now this inside these tags is where you put the display elements. Okay. Display elements. So you cannot have more than one tag inside this return function directly. So if I try putting a second tag, it's going to raise an error. See that? There's supposed to be only one global tag that contains all the other display elements that you're going to put on your interface. So you see that? That's a basic rule. If you forget that, then it eventually doesn't work. So it has to work like that. There's supposed to be a global component that contains all the other elements that you're going to display. Yes, Aaron? Yes, you can have different divs. Okay, so yeah, inside here you can have as many components as you want, as many divs, as many containers, as many HTML tags, rather header files, rather header tags, paragraph tags, images, any other thing you can think of that can be done in basic HTML, you can put it inside here. But the rule is there has to be one container for all those components inside the return function, rather inside the return of a component. So this is the syntax of a component. Now let's start with a heading. This is our application, but you see it still reads this file app.jsx, which is the active file we have here, does not have an export named, does not have any default export. I'm going to see what that means. So I want to display a simple heading, maybe an H1. We've done this in HTML, so I don't have to repeat it. I'm going to call it maybe First React App. Okay. So this should ideally be able to display this on the interface for us already, but it doesn't display it. Well, there's one thing you're supposed to do. When you see that app.jsx has a component called app, it is not accessible to external files at this point. It has to be exported first, because when I come to main.jsx, it imports the component app from app.jsx. What you import must have been exported. That's the rule. So in this case, we have to export app.jsx. And this is how you do the export. You simply type the word export. Now every JSX file can have secondary exports and default exports. So there are two things about the exports, but let me first type this export default. So this is how you write it: export default, then the component name, the component that you want to be the default export app. What that also means is that this file could have more than one component. I could define another component from here, maybe call it second, and give it exactly the same syntax. And maybe I wanted to display something for me still. But for it to display something for me, I have to put that particular thing in the return of that component. So I'm going to put a div here, second component, that is going to contain everything. So maybe I wanted to have a heading to type. Then I call it second. So now we have another component, but this cannot be the default export because we already have a default export from this application. Now by this time, it should already display on the interface. So why is it not? It already is. So it says Fast React App. See that? Now, now for me to also have this second component accessible outside, I need to export it as well. So if I want to use it anywhere else, I can always use it. And if I want to display the information from this component inside another component, this is how I'll do it. Let me first display it here. So you open tags, then you type the component name. So what's the component name? Component name is second. Then components, when you're displaying them in other components, they are written as self-closing tags. So self-closing tags don't have a closing tag. They simply have a slash, then the closing symbol. So typically a component would look like this. It has an opening tag, and then a closing tag, something like this. But this is for basic HTML components, basic HTML elements. Now for a component, it has to be displayed like this. So now I expect this heading, second component, to display under Fast React App on the interface because I've put it under. That's because also a component is read from up to down in terms of what it displays. So everything in the return keyword, in the return function here, goes from up to down in how it's read, including how it's displayed. So Fast React App should have second component displaying under it because that's what the second component displays in its return function. Only one heading, second component. So that's what it should read in this browser. One second. It should be able to display this, but we'll see why it's not. Okay, maybe the other rule is that all component names have to start with an uppercase character. It seems very simple, but it's actually another rule. All components have to start with an uppercase character, the names of components. So that's why it was showing me an error. When I change it to a lowercase, even where I defined it, it will not load. So it says the tag second is unrecognized in this browser. If you meant to render a React component, start its name with an uppercase character. So this is the importance of the console. Now for React especially, it really gives you error messages that are very helpful in the sense that they communicate elaborately what the issue is. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Like in this case, so I've noticed that sometimes we end up not reading the messages and we struggle with errors for a very long time, yet the answer is actually there, or the hint on what we could do to correct the error. So in this case, it's the uppercase character for the component names. Yes, so that's it. It should be able to display below it. So that's how you render a single component inside another component. You simply enter it as a self-enclosing tag at whatever position you want it to display. So you see it actually displays the results. Say it first React app, second component. Okay, that's the basic syntax for a component. And now if I want to access this outside and maybe display it in another component, I should be able to do that as well. Okay, so we're taking this first hour to understand the architecture of React, and then we can get into how to write, make fetch requests with APIs. Then tomorrow we'll go even further deeper into APIs. So yes, that's basically how a component looks like. Now moving further, when you think about, I'm going to delete this, maybe I'll comment it out. So when you think about APIs, for instance, they bring data into the application, data that you're going to actually use. So you must have a place to to store it. And specifically for storage, there is something we call a React hook. So React hooks are like extra components associated with React that you can use to interact with external environments or contain information that has been brought in from external environments. Okay, so let's see what one of them looks like. The one that I want us to use specifically regarding state persistence. Like if you want to hold information from maybe an API call, or you want to have it usable across the component or across the application, how would you store that information? Actually, it was already imported for us. There's a specific component here called useState, rather a React hook. Now, my presentation was small, but I'm going to, oh, there's an error in my file. Okay, yes, I referenced this component, but I wasn't displaying it. I wasn't rather defining it. I commented it out. That's why it was raising an error. Now it should be able to show me only the first heading. Okay, I'm going to just type here something. Let's look at useState and try to understand what it is. So it says useState is a fundamental feature of React components that allows developers to add stateful variables. And maybe let's talk about it. React hooks, what they are in a minute. Okay, so this answer simply gives us a definition. I didn't have a proper definition in my presentation, so that's why I'm referencing a browser query. It says React hooks are functions that allow developers to use state and other React features from functional components. So it's like when everything has been defined inside your component, there are certain things that you might want to use independent of the component, including the state that was probably fetched through that component, and maybe state that was fetched elsewhere and you want to reuse it in a certain component. So you would use React hooks to be able to enable that kind of interoperability across components. And we're going to see how it actually is used. So for you to use anything that is not native to a component, we said a component is self-sustaining. Like it can do everything it needs to do within itself to be able to finally display the information on the interface. Like you saw, this is a very small component. It's a very small set of data, set of piece of code. Only this, because this is all that is actually doing the job of displaying this application. When you compare it to a basic HTML file, you would have to write a lot of lines of code for you to be able to do this exact same thing. So let me first remove this from white display. So you can see that the lines of code are actually really short. I think it's about 6 lines. Now, there are certain things that this component might want to depend on. So everything it has to depend on for it to continue to maybe advance its functionality has to be imported and be enabled for it to be accessible through this application, through this component. So we're going to import that specific React hook, use state, and the simple way of importing something is type the word import. Now, when you look at these inputs that do not have curly braces around them, this is how you would import. This is how you would import default inputs. As you can see in main.jsx, I imported app.jsx, but if I had this application, if I had this component, this other component, okay, let me comment this out and uncomment this. So from this file app.jsx, I have two exports. I have the default export app, then I have another export second. So in main.jx, if I want to import this other component second, if I typed import, then I said second and imported it from, so this is the order. You type the import keyword, then whatever resource you want to import. So it's not always that you're going to be importing components. There are other things that you might be importing, files, images from wherever, but the syntax remains the same. So if I'm importing something from a file, then I typed the resource that I'm typing and where I am getting it from. So import resource from where. That's the simple syntax. So I'm importing this component from this file. But this would not work. So it's the same file, app.jsx. This import would not work. It would actually, I would expect it to even show me an error, but maybe because I'm not using the component anywhere. So because it's not a default export, I cannot export it without curly braces around it. It has to be imported, with curly braces around it for me to have access to it. Otherwise, wherever I'm going to use it, it will not work. You can only import resources like this without curly braces around them if they are default exports from the files where they are defined. So in the same sense, when I intended to import use state here, because it's not a default export from the file where it's defined, you have to import it with curly braces around it. So it's use state, and I'm importing it from what package? The package called React itself. Now the other thing about React hooks is that they have to be used within this. Okay, so yes, yes, you are. Okay, thank you very much for that submission. Maybe let me also go back to the definition of what a component is. When I was defining what a component is, I said is a self-contained, reusable unit. Oh, sorry about that. So let me also go back to the definition of a component. So I said a real component is a self-contained, reusable unit. Reusable is it's a keyword in this definition. That means that if you've already defined that component, you can use it elsewhere. Now, sometimes it's not all the time that it is you that is going to define the component. Sometimes it's going to be defined by other developers and you're only using it in your application, including components that were defined by default within the React framework that you would need for your application to actually run. One of those packages is React. So it has a number of methods as a component, and one of those methods is useState, which is a React hook. I hope that even clarifies it further. So when I was explaining about default exports and secondary exports, I explained why it's important to understand the difference depending on how you want to import them, wherever you're going to use them. So I'm importing it with brackets around it because it's not a default export from the component where it was defined. So moving on, for you to be able to use components, rather React hooks, you have to use them within excuse me, within the body of the component. So the body of the component is this area in the script block before the return method. So everything you write here has to be JavaScript, but also this is the only place where you can use React hooks in this area. This is called the body. You can only use React hooks in the body of a component. So that's where we're going to use this specific React hook called useState. And the purpose of it is for it to hold information, to hold state, to hold values that you're going to either define yourself or get from somewhere else when you're doing your fetch requests. So this is how it's defined. You would start with a const keyword. It's not necessarily supposed to be a const. You could use a let, but I prefer a constant. And then you create an array. So the first element of the array is the variable name itself. So in this case, I would say maybe var. Then the second parameter of the array, second element of the array is the variable, rather the function that is going to be used to modify the value, the variable. So usually it's conventional that we use the set keyword to make it more elaborate. That is actually refers to a function, set var, and then the variable name, the name of the variable is going to modify when someone calls it. So when you call set var, it would always change the value of var depending on what you pass into the set var function. And then you equate all this to useState. So this is the standard definition of a useState variable. So this is actually called a state variable. The whole component. I don't know why it's showing an error. Variable declaration expected. Okay. Let me first remove this so we don't get distracted with lots of code. useState. I don't know why it's showing an error. That's how it's supposed to be defined. Maybe I'll put a custom value here and see. Did I miss anything anywhere? Okay, let's first go ahead and continue with the code. So now if I want to give it a value, I could give it a default value here and say maybe first value. Okay, first value. So when I come down here in the where I'm going to be writing my code for me to display the information, I can actually display the value that I've stored, because now this is the default value of var. I can only modify the value of var by calling this function and passing in the value that I want to be the new value of var. But this default value right now is first value. So now I can print it on the interface in any way. Maybe I'm going to use yes. Yeah, actually, it's because it's a reserved keyword. It's a reserved. Well, let me just use a capital V. Okay. So yeah, thank you for that. So when I come down here, maybe I want to print it in a heading or a paragraph or anything. So I'll use a heading 3 instead. And now, ideally, I would type text here, and it should be able to display on the interface. When I refresh it, you can see it's down here. But if I want to get a value from a state variable and print it on the interface, I will put it in curly brackets like this, then the variable name. So when the component is loading or rendering, it will resolve to the value of var at that time, which is var. Now that's the variable name, and the value would resolve when the component is rendering. So I should be able to see the result. As you can see, it reads first value. Okay. Now there's something that is a very common error, especially with people that might be starting out with React. It's very likely it is correct syntax for you to call the setVar function here and pass in a value, maybe second value. Okay, but something tricky happens with how React behaves. Let's try refreshing this and see what happens. So it's no longer displaying anything. What typically happens every time you reset a state variable, the value of a state variable, React re-renders. Re-rendering means it tries to rebuild the application again. It might not exactly mean refreshing, because you might not manually come here and refresh, but re-rendering means React tries to rebuild the application again. Every time you change the value, because this line of code would change the value of var from first value to second value. That's what it means. But every time it comes to this line of code and completes it, it re-renders. It tries to rebuild the application again. Rebuilding means it puts all those components together again and then try to display them for you on the interface. But as soon as it's done, the application would go back to the very top. Come and declare the state variable, then come to this line and re-render again. So it becomes a cycle. Every time it completes doing it, it has to go back and try re-rendering the application. But then it always comes back to this very line again that causes it to re-render. So it creates a cycle and never completes the cycle of re-rendering. Now, there's a number of ways around this. One of them is to define this this method, to call this method inside another React hook called useEffects, which I'm going to explain it. Or you can put this on a function, on a button rather, inside a function that is going to be called when someone clicks a button or when the application is rendering. So it will never display anything at this point for as long as I have this function here directly put into the body of the component. The component would never complete rendering. But if I comment it out and load it, it's able to load the work again. If it's available here and it's active, it never loads. It never shows the work. So how do I actually resolve this? I'm going to put this command, this function called inside another React hook called useEffect. So by now we should understand what useState does and how to actually write a state variable in React. So now useEffect is also another component, rather another hook. But for us to be able to use it, we have to still import it from the React component. useEffect. Now, the difference between useEffect and useState is that they actually do different things. Very firstly, so useState is for creating state variables that are going to hold value. It could be value that you defined yourself, values that you defined yourself, or values that you've picked from elsewhere. Maybe you've been fetching information from an API. So it's a function, and it takes into parameters. One is a callback function. It looks at callback functions. Then the other is an array, a dependency array. So useEffect, every time your application renders and completes rendering and it's ready for display, that is ideally when useEffect runs. So after your application is ready to display on the interface, that's when useEffect runs. So ideally what would happen is that your application would go through the process of compiling all the things you wrote in the component up to this point, and it now knows what it's going to display and how it's going to display it, including the CSS that you wrote. That's when useEffect runs and modifies the values that were put in the first render, and the final render after useEffect has executed is what is displayed for you. Now, there are certain times when you want changes to happen to your interface depending on some things that you've modified. Maybe you want that every time someone clicks a certain button, the entire page reloads, or every time someone clicks a certain button, certain values change and then the pages reload. So everything that you want useEffect to depend on, you put it in this array, and we're going to see it practically. So inside this this callback function is where I would put this function invocation. And at this point, it should be able to allow me to change the value, but then also load completely. Because this only works after the entire rendering process has happened. So there's no time, it's not possible for it to go back to render again because the rendering process was complete by the time this useEffect executed. I don't know why my ideally React is supposed to reload automatically when I make changes, but it's not doing that, but that's okay as long as it's working. I think you can actually see that it reads the second value. So if I change this maybe to third value inside useEffect, so for now we're going to be using it without a dependency. Then later on we'll see how we can use it with a dependency after we start fetching. Okay, so it reads third value now. Okay, so everything is working normally as we would expect. And from here now, I want us to go directly to fetching information from an API and then display it on the interface. So I think yesterday there was a very interesting API that I saw. It was my very first time seeing it as well. The Chuck Norris API for Chuck Norris jokes. So it's the one I'm going to start with just to demonstrate certain things, then we can get into the rest of the work that we'll be doing. So the Chuck Norris jokes, we're going to fetch a few of these jokes one by one. And I think maybe they talked about endpoints. So an endpoint is just a path to a specific function of an API that would give you a certain result based on how the path was defined and what result you expect from the path. Okay, so this was a basic state variable. So I'm going to define another state variable here that is going to hold the joke. I want to call it joke. So another state variable, I'll call it joke. Then the function that would modify the value of joke, I would call it set joke. Use state. So this one I don't want it to have a default value. It would just be empty. If there's nothing in joke, it doesn't read anything. And then I will change this maybe to Chuck Norris jokes. Chuck Norris jokes. Then down here in this is a heading 1. Let me leave it as a heading 2. It should be able to display the joke. Now I expect to have an error because jokes is empty. Jokes is undefined. But anyway, for use state, I think it fills it with an empty string, so that's why it doesn't show an error. Okay, so this is where we're going to be displaying our joke. But then how are we going to feed the joke into the variable joke? We have to call set joke at some point within the component itself, at a place where we are sure we actually will be able to get the joke after we have fetched it. So I'm going to use the fetch keyword like we looked at it yesterday. So the fetch keyword takes in 2 parameters. The very first parameter is the path. Then the second parameter is the object of the options that define the nature of the request that you're making, and maybe the requirements that specific endpoint requires of you for you to be able to get data from it. So one of the very first things that is actually fed into this object is the method that you're making, the kind of request that you're making. It's defined as a method, but it really defines just the kind of request that you're going to make. And we're going to look at the different types of requests that you can make. These are keys, by the way, so they should have values. Then the second element in this array, rather in this object, is the headers. So some endpoints are restricted by certain parameters. They are rate limited in the sense that for you to be able to access them, maybe you need to have some privileged rights that you might have picked. Maybe you made a payment or a subscription that gives you access to the API. So all those credentials that allow you or authenticate you to access that API are supposed to be provided in the headers. There's a lot more that can be provided in the headers, but that's one of the things. Then the third and most rarely provided information is the body. So this usually defines how you want your response to come back to you. For instance, if you can define, depending on how the API, the provisions of the API, you can define how you want your return values to return to you, either as a JSON file or as an XML file. Some APIs have up to even 5 options you can choose from of how you want your data to return to you, depending on how they are defined. And most of this information is really documented for those APIs. And we're going to be seeing it practically when you start looking at the different APIs we can use to fetch blockchain data. So by default, if this object is not provided, the fetch API would simply use a get request. So let's look at the different requests that you can make, the different methods. So these are some of the methods that you can actually use on the fetch API. The first is the get method. That one just gets data from the API. So you want to get a joke from the Chuck Norris API, you would make a get request. Then a post request would send information to the API. A put request would modify an existing resource. So for instance, if you wanted to change your password on your Google password, you would make a put request to your identity objects on the Google Cloud. If you wanted to delete your account, your Facebook account, your Telegram account, you would make a delete request to the maybe the Telegram server or API. If you wanted to maybe modify your profile picture, or you wanted to modify something about your profile on a certain social media platform, you would make a patch request. So you're modifying just a simple component, just changing just one thing on the entire profile that you define that was as it's created for you on that specific platform. So these are the different kinds of requests that you make. So by default, fetch makes a get request until you define otherwise. So if all these are not provided, if you don't have the object, that means if the API also allows you to make a request without you having the rest of this information, the fetch request would make a get request. So it just gets information from that API and returns it to you. Okay, so what happens is when it returns the information, it returns it as a data stream. So what a stream is, as you can see how a river flows, it's a continuous flow of information. So the fetch request returns what has been provided. We think of it like a certain point on a stream where you only pick a bucket of water at every instance. So the water that is flowing in the stream at that point is what is available to you, and it's what you can pick from the well, from the river, or from the stream. So that's what the fetch request does. Whatever has been provided for it at that point as a response is what it provides to you, which provides a data stream to you. So a continuous data flow. So everything that is being provided from that API endpoint is delivered to you whenever it's available. Because that API could be making requests to that endpoint specifically. It could be making other secondary requests elsewhere, about 7 requests. But those data points would come back at very different points in time from when you actually made the request. So every request that has provided a result, it will be provided to you. It will be provided to you through a data stream. So if you made a request to an endpoint, for instance, this endpoint that we're going to be using as an example, Chuck Norris API. So this is the endpoint. So if this endpoint made requests elsewhere, about 7 requests elsewhere, and the data was coming back at different points back to that endpoint before it is delivered to you, who the end user, the end requester. Every time there's a result that has been returned from one of the secondary requests, the data will be returned to you. The data will be returned to you in a data stream. So that's why the fetch request, the fetch API returns data in a data stream. Now, a data stream is an advanced form of a promise. I think we looked at promises yesterday. So every time it is returned to you, you can use the then keyword. I don't know if it was explained. So the then keyword would be an equivalent of the await keyword. So let me first do it manually here and see what it does. I'm going to define this as a data stream. So I have to await it. What that also means is that now I need an asynchronous function. So this is the other thing about, let me first cut this out. This is the other thing about use effects. This callback function cannot be made asynchronous. If you want to define an asynchronous function, you have to define it inside that callback function. So I'm going to define an asynchronous function and call it fetch call, and I will use the arrow function syntax. So this is an asynchronous function, and inside here is where I would make that request, because that's the only place I am able to access the await keyword. So that I will generate the data stream. Let me first remove this. So when I get the data stream, then I can convert the data stream into a JSON file. Okay, although it is still okay, into a JSON file. And yeah, I think data JSON. So let's see what happens. Then do I have the data? Let me try to print this information on the console and see what it looks like. data.json. Now I have to call this function inside useEffect for me to be able to access this code now. So yeah, I think that's it. It's a basic thing. I don't think we need this anymore. It has only one endpoint. So when I run it, you can see that it returns an object for me. So the object contains a number of things. This is the data that is returned from that object, from that endpoint. We looked at objects and you can see it's an object with a number of components. There's categories, there's all this information, but what specifically do I want from this data? I want the joke. And the joke is on the element value. So I access it by key, then I'll be able to get the value of the joke. Okay, so now I have displayed this information in my console. So how do I now bring it to actually be displayed for the user? Because the users will not go into the console. I mean, that's not how sites work. You're supposed to show the information to the user on the interface. So from here, I have my data, and I can just pass now this data, specifically the joke, to the state variable that I declared up here, set joke. Okay, so maybe before I even display it, I could just, okay, I have an assistant that is very efficient, almost knows what I want to do all the time. But yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Data.json. So data.json is this entire object, as you can see it here. It has a number of properties, but which property do I actually want? The value. Maybe I could take something else. Let me try taking the ID and see. ID. See what the joke displays. Let me refresh it. So it displays for me the ID, because that's what I requested for. Now, this ID has been stored. When I call this function setJoke, it sets the value that I pass into it into the joke variable, state variable. But I am printing the joke variable here in the heading 3. Let me make it 4. Maybe a little bit bigger. When I refresh it, it's even much smaller. Oh, I made it even smaller. Okay, so that's the joke ID. But the joke is displayed in value. So the reason we usually, as developers, print everything to the console first, for you to get a glimpse of what kind of information you have and how to actually sort it and pick out what you want from it. So as you can see, I was able to get the joke. Should be able to print the joke by now. So it prints the joke. So the movie Don't Mess with Zohan is based on a true story, blah, blah, blah. And whenever I refresh it, it gets me another joke, gets me another joke, gets me another joke. Because every time I refresh it, it runs useEffect. It renders useEffect. And useEffect does what it's supposed to do again, and again, and again. Every time you refresh it. So when you rendering can happen in the background, or it can happen when you refresh. So when you refresh your re-rendering, you're manually invoking a re-render of your application. So that's why useEffect runs again, because it always runs after a render instance. Okay, so we have successfully picked information from an API and displayed it on the interface. I'm sure we did this yesterday, but you might notice that we've written far less code than we would have written if we were writing HTML. So yeah, that's how you would actually fetch data from an API using the fetch keyword. And this also is a very detailed syntax. Alternatively, I could use the then keyword, and I would prefer that because it's also faster, much faster. So I'm going to do everything again using the then keyword. So again, I would make a fetch request. And when I make the fetch request on a new line, then takes in a callback function. and then you pass the data stream as a parameter, as an argument to the callback function. So I'll call this a stream. Then I'll convert the stream into a JSON object. Okay, after that, then what? Then it gives you the data. That's it. So you have the data. Now, when you do this, when you put curly braces in a callback function, excuse me, what it does is that it runs the operations that you put in the curly braces, but does not return anything. Otherwise, if you just write it like this without curly braces, the value that you put on the other side of the arrow is the return function. It's just what is going to be returned from that request. Okay, I think this is okay. I should be able to get the same data. So I can do this, then also print it on the console. Console.log, then the data, as I have it here received. I just say data. Does it give me an error? Use effect. Fetch again. Yeah, this has to be like that. Okay, so I'm getting my work back. So this is a shorter syntax and I prefer to use this, but I'll keep this commented out. Can always push it to GitHub as well. So I set this variable here, but I think I have stopped using its value. I'm now using the second variable. I was just using it for demonstration, so I'll remove it. Okay. I think by now we understand how a function component works. And we've looked at two React hooks and how they work. And the purpose of the return function and the divs that you would, the very first wrapper tags that you would use to display everything else. Yeah, by now that should make sense. Okay, so maybe just a little bit of just something we could do. So you might have seen loaders on interfaces, where if the API has not returned the information, you communicate to the user in a certain way and remind them that we are waiting on something. So I could see all numbers of loaders, and there's a number of. I want to now show you how you can actually render applications into the what? Into your render components into your application from elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to use this. I want to use this terminal. So there's a specific set of loaders that I love to use because it is someone else built this, but they are complete. Like they are things I could actually reuse in my application. So the advantage with React compared to HTML is that there's a number of things that you can efficiently reuse. But these are things you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with vanilla HTML and JS. But you can do it with React. It's easy for you to reuse components that have been defined by someone else. So that's what I want to do. I want to add a loader here so that when the information hasn't returned yet, it can load and just show me that we're waiting for information from the API, and then so just hold on. I'm going to use, they're called React loaders. Someone else built this, so I'm just going to delete. They're actually called React spinners, and you can see each of them. I'm sure you've seen some of these in different places. And so which one should I take? Let me see which I should use. Something that is elegant, isn't very very noisy. Let me use the bounce loader. So when you click on it, it has every information you need for you to know how to reuse it. Okay, bounce loader right here. Information about it is here, so I can show the code to see how how the component can be imported where I want it to be. You can see that it says bounce loader here, so that's how you'd import the component. But then I want to get the entire SDK and have it as a package in my application first before I can be able to use this bounce loader. Okay, so that's the code I'm looking for now. Show the code. Let me see, it should be here. So here it is. Now, depending on the package manager that you're using, you can import it as an SDK or as a set of resources that you're just going to use. So if you're using yarn, that's the command for adding the package from npm, the npm registry. So the npm registry is the npm registry is a library of packages that are defined and are reusable through Node.js as a framework, and you can access all of them here if you want to even know details about how to import these npm packages, or you want to do something but you're not sure what package you should use. You can always come to the npm registry and pick a reference. There's always a lot of information here, so I can search packages. I can even find it here. So this is like the official site. I can find all the information about it here, but I can also find the information about it on the registry because it is there. This one is called React Spinners. Yeah, collection of React loading spinners. And here it is, React Spinners. You can even get to the GitHub repository here and see how it was built, if you would like that, and how you can install it with different package managers. So with npm, this is what you would do. So that's what we're going to do, because we're using npm, not package manager. When I click here, it should actually give me the other alternative for different package managers. So the GitHub repository is here. You can see everything and how they were defined, how they were written. Now this also should remind you, should give you a hunch that you can actually write your own code and people can reuse it. You can see they were written in TypeScript, .tsx. The bootloader is here. And you can see they were actually written in React. Although this is an advancement called Next.js. But you can see this is a component, function bootloader, and you can see it has properties here. These we shall look at them a little bit later. But it's a component, and inside the display, you can see the CSS here, and then eventually you can see everything displays here in the component. So then the default export here. Someone microphone is on. Oh, sorry about that. Maybe probably you could reload, because I think on my monitor I can see it change when I change the screen. Yeah, on my monitor it shows it's stable. Probably you could reload. Okay. So yeah, you can see that this is actually React. At the end of it, you can see there's a default export. So someone wrote React code, uploaded it in the registry, and now I'm going to reuse it. So this is something you could do as well. You can even make it premium, that people have to pay for it before they can access it. But yeah, those are all possibilities. And so I'm going to import it using npm, because that's the package manager that I'm using. So I would say npm install It's called React Spinners. You can get the name directly from here. React Spinners. Now, where they use the keyword save, I think I saw save somewhere. Here, when they use the keyword save, it simply suggests that it's going to be used as a developer dependency. That means you're only using it to build the application, but eventually when you upload your project to the internet, it's not going to go along with it, with the application. It is simply going to be bundled into the application. Then here, you can see this is how you would import any of the loaders from the package or from the component. Because it's not a default export, you have to import it in curly braces. Get that? Okay. So you can see here we had them as default exports, but all these files are going to be used into a single file later on, where they are not default exports, but it's a little bit far, so we shall get into that later. So I use the capital D because it's an alternative for the save keyword, and it's going to import it. It's not a very big component, I believe. Oh, it's actually done. Now I'm going to import it and display it in my application. So import, which one did I say I was going to use? I said I was going to use the bounce loader. So when I clicked on it, it gave me the options of how I could actually get it. Show the code, bounce loader. This is how I'll display it. But when I'm importing it, I'll import it as a bounce loader from React Spinners. So that's it. Sometimes even after I just type it here, the keyword of what I want to import, it just shows me where I'll be getting it from. React Spinners. Okay. So now here I am displaying the joke. So when the joke is not there, that means when the joke variable is empty, there's just nothing that displays until the API responds. Okay. But then I want to show something to the user, like that before the joke displays, show this to the users for them to know that we're actually waiting on something. So here I would use the ternary operator syntax and say, when the joke is present, display the joke. Otherwise, display the bounce loader. That's simply it. And because it's coming in as a component, I use the self-enclosing syntax for the tag for it to be a component. And let's see how it works. So the API is rather fast, so it doesn't display for a very long time. It shows for a very short time. But I want to do something else here. Maybe I could do a simple set timeout so that I extend the time it displays, maybe 2 to 3 more seconds. So just put this entire request into a set timeout function. Sure, we looked at this as well. So just like every other synchronous function, takes in a callback function. And then here I put the time parameter for how long I want it to load, to await for the result to return, maybe 4 seconds, which is 4,000 milliseconds. Then inside the callback function, I'll put the logic for the fetch request. And here it goes. Let's see. So now it loads for a little longer because it's waiting on the 4 seconds to get done, then it displays the results. But the API is rather faster than 4 seconds. So yes, I could change that to something else. Maybe I could use a bit loader. Let me use something else that is a little bit more animated. Let me use the propagate loader. So I could just change this to the propagate loader. Propagate loader right here. It actually imported it for me here directly. So now it's the propagate loader that I display. Until 4 seconds are done, then the API will return the result. So yeah, that's basic about how you would fetch information from the API. And yeah, so I was supposed to look at something else that I think would have been React specific, But let's first get into the APIs themselves, the data indexers that we're going to be using before we can get into that. Okay, so yeah, by now you should be able to fetch information from an API and display it on the interface. Then, show the user that, hey, the API might be a little bit slow, but we are waiting on results from it. So how do you communicate that? You give them loaders, give them skeleton loaders. You might see those on some sites. But yeah, every time you do it, it runs use effect. That's why it always brings a new request, a new result all the time. Because maybe the jokes are random, so they always return a different joke every time you make the request. And this is different because every time you click reload, it re-renders the application. So it use effect runs again. Okay, are there any questions up to this point? If you have any questions or anything you'd love to add on, could bring it up before we can go ahead. Okay, I think we're okay then. Now moving on, there's a number of places we can get information about blockchains. And there's a number of sets of information that we might need about a specific blockchain or a specific address. So some of these things you might not be well versed with them yet because we only looked at them excuse me, maybe once in the sessions where we did them. But it is very critical for you to know some of the information regarding your specific account. For instance, if a user connected an account and they wanted to know how many transactions they've done in a specific week. I don't know if I can show you some bit of history on these wallets. Sure, we looked at MetaMask the other time, so you must be familiar with it. So depending on the blockchain that you want to fetch information from, there's different services, different indexing services. So indexing is simply getting information from a blockchain and bringing it to your application. So the most prominent one that is actually really focused on analytics and bringing information that has been analyzed and taken through a process of evaluation and wrangling is called Dune. Dune Analytics, okay. So this is it. There's a number of them. I specifically brought this list up because it has a number of indexing tools that you could use. So Dune is both an analytics platform and also has an indexer as well. And there's a number of them that you could use. But I'm going to show you about 3 and what they have in common and how you might typically use them to fetch data from their API endpoints about specific blockchains with the exact parameters that you might need. So let's start with Dune and Gold Sky. Gold Sky is also an indexer platform. Here it actually tells you about it. Power your apps with real-time blockchain data and subgraphs without managing complex infrastructure. So ideally, if you are going to fetch this data on your own without using an indexer, it should be rather tedious because you would have to rebuild the infrastructure that they have under the hood for them to effectively get all this data from different blockchains onto your applications. And for instance, if I had an address is simply like my entry point into a blockchain. For me to be able to interact with a blockchain, I need to have an address. But the transactions that I'm going to run with that address and it's going to have a history based on what I have done with that specific address on that blockchain. And maybe there are certain things I could do evaluation on about those transactions that I have done. Like what nature of transactions have they been predominantly? In what time period did I do them? How much money have I been transferring or losing in transactions? So here, when I look at this specific address, this is a transaction I did, I don't know, on 7th Feb. 2026. That is today is 13th. That's a number of days ago. So this is data that is being fetched from the blockchain by my wallet and being displayed to me in the wallet as history, something that I did before. But let me copy this address and take it to an explorer. Let me say maybe Etherscan. I think I've done something on Etherscan with this address, specifically on Sepolia, which is a test network. So ideally, if I was building a platform where probably we are doing analytics of a specific account, so that if you connect your account to my platform, it will analyze your performance, your participation on that blockchain, or maybe we are trying to evaluate which people qualify for certain sets of rewards based on the activity that they've had on our chain. There's the very first ideal place I would go for me to get the information about their activity would be the block explorer for that blockchain. So for instance, if I was running people that were maybe interacting with a particular smart contract, we haven't looked at smart contracts in detail, but smart contracts have addresses that identify them. And every time you interact with a smart contract, it displays on the block explorer that you had a transaction you made with that smart contract. So in this case, you can look at these operations. This is my transaction history for this specific account, as you can see it here. So 6 days ago, I made an interaction with a certain smart contract, specifically with the transfer function of that smart contract. And here is the smart contract address. Okay, DEA. This is the address of the smart contract. And then I was transferring a certain amount of ETH from maybe my account or from that account, from that smart contract rather, to another address. But let's look at the transfer function. Okay, let's start with the transaction hash. So we defined what a transaction hash is, and so I was sending funds to someone. This is one of those default operations. It wasn't really a smart contract. But let me look at this. So this is actually a transaction that I made with a smart contract. How you know it is a smart contract? Especially on Etherscan, it has this document symbol. It tells you it's a contract, not an externally owned account. You remember we talked about externally owned accounts and smart contracts, then define the distinction between them. So when I interacted with this smart contract, I specifically interacted with one of its functions. So which function was it? The function is called val. Let's see, does it actually have the function val? When I look at the contract code, it's not verified, so I can't see the contract code, but that's okay. So the smart contract has the function val, and that's the function I interacted with in this transaction. So the transaction was successful about 100 days ago, almost. That's last year, of course. And this is the very address, my address E18. It did that interaction 100 days ago. E18, the address bars, account details. E18, 7A E18. That's my externally owned account. I made this interaction with this address. So if I had the number of these transactions that I was tracking, maybe to determine which people qualify for a certain reward program and others that do not, this is the ideal place I would come to, the Block Explorer, because that's where all the information is. But the way the information is arranged on a Block Explorer, it is not customizable, or you cannot query any kind of information in a very particular order. Because for instance, if I wanted to find out transactions that I've done with a specific address, calling a specific function, that is not something I can do on a Block Explorer. I cannot customize this data. The way it is displayed is pretty much the way you can have it. You cannot modify the way this data is returned to you. In other words, you don't have any possibility of querying information based on certain filters. Now that's one of the reasons we have data indexers for blockchain data, because they can allow you to access APIs and modify the results according to certain query parameters that you provide for that data to be brought back to you. I hope that makes sense. So for instance, if I wanted to find out how many times I interacted with the val function in the last 3 months, that is something I can do with data that I have fetched from an API of a data indexer, but I cannot do it directly on a block explorer. So a block explorer has all the information, but it is cumbersome to optimize. But with an API endpoint provided by a data indexer, it is much easier for you to do that just by providing specific query parameters in your request, as they would be required of you for you to be able to do that. So we're going to look at one of the endpoints from Goldsky. Maybe let me share a link to this list of indexers that you could use. They are very, very important now that we're having a lot of information being transferred on chain. Institutions now becoming someone's microphone is on. Okay, so I've shared a link to this page, so you can always come and look at the different indexers, and we're going to get into details of them. So there's a number of ways you can interact with these indexers. And Goldsky. Let me look at the documentation first. And also for Dune. Now Dune has two services. One is called Dune, the Analytics API, then there is SIEM. But we're going to be using SIEM. I'll explain later how it's different from Dune. Because sometimes you can get data that is historical data of things that have happened, but then sometimes you can also get data of things that are happening. So it's like a stream of responses from what is happening on a blockchain, or historical data, just things that have happened. So we're going to start with historical data. Today we'll be looking at historical data of things that have happened, operations, transactions, interactions with blockchains that have happened already. 100 days ago, 10 days ago, 3 hours ago, 10 minutes ago, up to any degree of frequency. But essentially, information of things that have already happened. So on the SIEM's site, there's an API. So it says 60 plus chains, one unified API. This is very powerful. Because imagine, there's a number of blockchains, but if you wanted to get data of all these blockchains, I don't know if it's my internet. Transaction data on all these blockchains, because maybe I could demonstrate it, and you see the real utility of it in real time. Hopefully it allows me to do this. Usually my MetaMask gets slow every time I connect an account. Every time I'm streaming. But we looked at a bridge earlier on and defined it as a platform or a protocol that allows you to transfer tokens or to transfer value from one blockchain to another. So I'm opening Relay because I want to demonstrate something that is quite powerful, that is only enabled through an indexer. So as you might have realized earlier on, I think we we looked at how we can interact with a. Did you look at it? I don't know if we did. I think we interacted with a few bridges, or maybe Uniswap. We might have looked at Uniswap. So when you're going to connect your wallet to this platform, you might have balances on that address on different blockchains. As you can see here, there's a number of chains, quite a number of chains. So these are the chains, and then these are the specific tokens, depending on the chain. We have chains, not all of them are represented here, by the way, but these are the most usable. I mean, they're the ones you will find people using mostly. These are how many? 40 something chains. So if you have token balances on each of these chains, in your wallet you would have to go and switch the chain always to see the different balances on each of those chains. But if I connected my wallet here, I am connecting MetaMask, AVM, so it should prompt my wallet to pop and allow me to connect. What is fascinating about what I'm going to show you is that Relay indexes your balances on each of these chains. It gets every token that has a balance above zero and returns it and displays it to you, and then gets you the dollar equivalent in total of each of the tokens that you have. That is not something that you can do on your own in less than a minute. It would actually require you to get a calculator, then try to find out the value of all your tokens in total on all the chains at the same time. But that's the power of indexers, is that they make data fetching efficient, that you can fetch loads and loads of data in a matter of seconds, something that you wouldn't typically do if you are doing it on your own, looking for that data on block explorers. Because now, think about it, finding the balances of tokens on the block explorers of 40 chains, when would you finish? Okay, it's a little bit slow, but hopefully it loads and completes. Okay, connecting. And hopefully I have some. Okay, I don't know why it's fading. This is an issue I have with MetaMask, especially when I'm trying to interact with a service. I don't know if it's just my own version. Let me give it one more try, then I jump onto another index, rather another bridge that I think might be able to show us what I'm trying to demonstrate. So far, what we have discussed, we've looked at React, and so what I'm trying to do now is to show you how we can get this blockchain data and display it on the front end for the end users, for the different end users, and how we can interact with these different services. Okay, hopefully we will demonstrate it on a different bridge, but meanwhile, so that we do not waste time, okay, so let me look at Goldsky documentation. I think it's here. So this is usually a documentation of the API. So you can see there's a number of ways you can fetch data. Is there a question? There's a number of ways you can fetch data from Goldsky. You can use subgraphs. So there's a subgraph API, but that's a special way of interacting with platforms like this, and we're going to look at that later on. So the one I'm looking for is the HTTP API, the one where you have to make a request, like we made this request using the HTTPS protocol, not the GraphQL protocol. So that's the API that I want us to use, and I think just a moment, I think. We used covalent. So it's just something you have to keep looking around for. If they say they have it, they should have it, but sometimes it's not very open. It's not like something you can come to the site and see straightforward. So I'm going to try another one. I'm going to use something else. So we have Dune, but I'll come to Dune later. Covalent, let me use this. Now this is another indexer platform. I think this one is much easier to find. One of its products here, we have the GoldRush API. This is the one you would use now to fetch data from the blockchain and display it on the interface. So we might do it for one or two APIs. Then we will see how we can fetch, fill in some of the information that is required for us to fetch the data successfully from these different APIs. So I'll start with Covalent, then go to Sims. Meanwhile, I'll keep trying this MetaMask thing. Let me use Jump, I think. Okay. So I'm going to first look at the documentation, then we'll come back to some of the things that are required. So it says here, GoldRush offers the most comprehensive blockchain data API suite for developers, analysts, and enterprises. So if you want a data analyst and you're trying to evaluate certain elements about a blockchain, you can do it through these APIs. So there are two APIs for GoldRush. There's a foundational API, then the streaming API. But let's look at the API reference first, then see how we can fetch data using it. And so you can use the GoldRush SDK. We're going to look at SDKs probably tomorrow. And I think this is one of the things that was covered, where we used classes and creating new object instances using the new keyword. I'm sure you remember this. Now, so for instance, if we're going to use this specific endpoint, now there's supposed to be a base URL. For instance, when we look at this request, we had https api.chucknorris.io. Now, usually this is the base URL that you have for a specific API. Then these are just other specific endpoints. It could actually end here because this one is just for the jokes. Then these are the other specific endpoints that you might want, maybe .run/random or /category, depending on what information. So usually the specific endpoint does not contain the base URL. So you'd have to find the base URL for you to be able to use this service. And this is something that I've experienced a lot myself. I always have to look for the base URL, but they're always documented somewhere. So this is the documentation. So /address, /wallet address, /what. So the endpoint also has a definition of what it does. So in this case, it says get activity across all chains for a specific address. Imagine that. Get activity of the entire address, across the entire set of chains that are provided by this service. So let's try this API and see. So you can see some of the query parameters and where they are supposed to be put. So authorization, it is a string, it should be in the header. Path, it is also required, it's a wallet address. Now the parameters are divided. Some are in the header. I think we looked at the header when we were looking at a simple fetch request here. This one, if for instance this had that object, one would define the method that we're going to be doing. Then the headers, just headers. everything in headers would be here, and then the body, if there's anything that is required to be in the body. Okay, so every parameter that is supposed to be in the header has to be put here. Every parameter that is supposed to be in the body has to be put here. Then what method are we going to do? In this case, when I do making a GET request, it actually defines what kind of request you're making. It's a GET request. So I want to try it out. So then I can specify which method I am going to be using. So here I'll be using TypeScript using the SDK, but the specific method that I want to use is this. And you can see this is the base URL. It comes up to this point, api.covalenthq.com. So this is the base URL. And if you have this, you can always just keep changing this depending on where you're going to be using it to get the information. Then you can see this is the method. Then you have headers. So in the headers, you have authorization, and the authorization, you have a bearer token. So this is now where you need to go to the service and obtain the bearer token. This is something that you obtain specifically to you, a method of authorization that authenticates you to use the service, this specific endpoint. It has to be in the headers, as we talked about it. But now, before you commit to an API endpoint and write the code for that API endpoint, there's a service you can use to test the endpoints and just, look at the way the data is arranged before you can commit to writing it into your code. That service is an API testing platform. It's called Postman. You can always come to Postman and test your APIs before you can commit to writing them into your code. I think I have an account on one of my emails, but I'm not sure it's this one. Oh, the interface changed. Let me see if the wallet will connect. It actually doesn't work. I don't know why. Oh, the right chain, the right platform. I think I am, but wow. Okay. I don't think this is going to be helpful. So okay, so I'm going to open relay this side so that it doesn't interfere with what we're doing. I think I have the account on either be Microsoft Edge. Oh yes, I have MetaMask there. So now this is something else I wanted to talk about. You need to be very careful when you are when you're working with bridges, because you're going to connect your wallets and the wallet contains your assets. So you need to be very sure you're connecting to the exact correct bridge. Because I think actually one time I look at this, it has the exact logo of Relay, the bridge I just opened earlier, but it's a completely different URL. When you open it, it might actually have exactly the same interface. And connect your wallet, transfer your funds, and they never come back to you. Okay. So the correct one is relay.link, and you can actually verify the smart contracts that you're interacting with before you sign a message, before you sign a transaction. Wow. It's almost the same. But this is not relay, the bridge that I actually want to use. This is not deniable. It's almost real. It's almost authentic. Imagine. But this is the bridge that I want to interact with. Do you notice that they look very closely similar? They have the same header, file, the same header. Yeah, exactly the same header. Look at that. But they're exactly different. This is relay.link/bridge. This is app.relay slash hyphen swap.top. So you need to be very, very keen because you are working with your money. Now, this is the cost of self-sovereignty, is that all the security around your assets is you're accountable to your assets in every single way. You're supposed to be absolutely responsible for what you do. And I think we can see a very clear picture of how you can be manipulated. So yeah, I said I'm going to keep trying it because I really want to demonstrate that concept of showing you different balances on different chains and how it's very powerful in a way that it makes it easy to index and obtain information from these different blockchains in a matter of seconds. Okay, let's give it a minute, then we can get back. It might take longer. Let me give it a while. Okay, let me try to reduce some of the tabs that I have. And now, I don't need this. Okay, that's the same thing. So I was logging into Postman. Shouldn't take very long. So I want to try Covalent, specifically this endpoint, and see how it returns all the information for my address. Then we can do that on the interface, and then we can try to go through the different endpoints that it has, and we see how we can build a picture of an application we can build with all this information. Internet is a little bit slow, but not to worry, it will work. So because I know I'm going to be using it in the application already, when one side is slow, I'll be making progress on the other. So I'm going to copy this URL and paste it in my application here. So I'm going to change it now and make it my fetch request. So I'm changing this URL to the one of Covalent. Then after testing it on Postman, I will pass in the parameters. Okay, so this is my specific URL. But why I'm using backticks is because I'm going to be manually passing in my address. So now these are called path parameters, and how path parameters are passed in, I hope we looked at how we use backticks. So for instance, if there's something that you want to dynamically add into a string before it renders, you use backticks, and then you pass in this, you use this syntax, curly braces with a $sign at the start, and then the value that you want to pass in. Okay, it might be a string, it might be a number, but it will all render into a string. So now this will be dynamic. I mean, I'll be picking it from somewhere. For instance, if I had a state variable named wallet address, I'll just be passing in the value of wallet address from here. Okay, so let's first move ahead. So application is going to change a little bit. but workspaces. So when it opens an account, you can come to workspaces. If you don't have a workspace, you can create a workspace. But I have workspaces that I can use. So I'll use my workspace, for instance. It's created 10 months ago. And then I can create a new request here. I think it's because of my internet, it's quite slow. So yes, you can then specify what kind of request are you going to make. Is it a get, a post, a put, a patch, delete, head? There's so many kinds of requests you can make. But specifically, I'm going to be making a get request. So I'm making a get request to what path? To this path. Now, since this is going to be, since I'm going to do this dynamically right now, I can just pass in the wallet address here as a path parameter. Let me see which address I should use. I'll pick an address that has a much higher activity than the others. I think Substrate does have a lot of activity. Okay, so I'll copy the address of Substrate, ends with 693. Then I paste it here. Initially there was a word here, wallet address, but I'm passing in this wallet address as a path parameter. Okay, and when I come back to my documentation, it said in the path parameters, wallet address is required. That means you cannot make a request without modifying wallet address. What is there any other path parameter? No, there is none. But there are query parameters. So there's a set of parameters in a request like this. So we've looked at path parameters. Those ones are directly in the link itself. Then there are query parameters. Now query parameters are added at the end of the path with a question mark. Then you specify the key of the query and the value of the query request, query parameter. So what are the query parameters? One of them is testnets. Actually, it's one. It's testnets. So I'll type testnets here if I needed information. What does it say? You can read what it says. Set to true to include testnets with activity in the response. By default, it is set to false and only returns mainnet activity. By now, I think we know the difference between testnets and mainnets. So test networks are the ones that you use to write your applications and test your applications before you can run them live on main networks. So as a query parameter here, it requires that I put information about test networks, activity on test networks, because what? This endpoint returns activity across all chains for an address. Okay, so testnets. I could also just type them here as query parameters here. So it says, no, I say testnets. Testnets, then I could type the value here as true. Is there anything else I've left out regarding my request? So, one, I need authorizations. And where the authorization is going to be? In the header. So I can come back here and then come to authorizations, specifically headers rather. In the headers, then I type the keyword of the element that I'm supposed to enter. It's called authorization. So I type the keyword authorization here. So I'm going to transfer all this into our code. We're just testing it to make sure that we're sure of how the way information is returned, or if it actually does what we're supposed to get. Authorization. Did I type it correctly? Because if it's wrong, it's not going to work. And it's required. Every time you see the keyword required or a star at the top of anything in code, if it's not representing authorization, then I have to enter the value here. But the value is a bearer token, where token is the Gold Rush API key. So this value here has to be a token I get from the API itself. Now, for me to get the API key, I have to go to the Gold Rush platform and create an account with Gold Rush, so I get an API key of my own. So usually what that API key is used for is tracking your activity. So let me just continue with Google. I think I already have an account with Gold Rush. It's just for tracking your activity and maybe determining if you've reached the limit that they gave you for free access, then maybe you can pay, because that's how they make money. Is that at some time when you are going to be using this API over and over again, there's compute power that they're consuming on their end for you to have access to that data, even just preserving it for you. So for them to make money and maybe continue to hold that service for you, you need to pay some money after you have tested that this API actually does what you require of it on your end. Okay, so I'm signing in and I should be able to get the API key. And when I look on my left, there's a sidebar that says manage API. There's a sidebar, then there's something that reads, okay, my time actually expired, as you can see. Your trial has expired. Continue using Gold Rush API by upgrading to Gold Rush Professional. So you see that? They gave me a time period. I don't think I can even use this account because I don't have any credits. Let me create another account using under a different email. I'll use Congen. So I used Gold Rush for an application I built some time back, and I was using the free service. So I think you can see even here in my messages it reads, I have 0 credits. So no matter how much I try to make this request, it will not go through. It would actually return with an error. I think so. So let me actually test it and see if it returns data for me. I can create a new API key here, or I can use what already exists. So what is the key name? I'm going to call it data indexing. Then I create. And it is a little bit slow, but it should display all my keys right here. So, it's successfully created. I have 2 keys. You can see this. When I view the usage, total credits consumed. I've used none. I want to see my keys. Details. Activity. I want to see my keys. Development key. I think these are the keys. Okay, the key is right here. So this is the key. It says your API key. Use this key to authenticate your requests. Authentication simply means checking if a certain requester has the rights or qualifies or is eligible for a certain thing. In this case, it's going to be checking if you are eligible to access the API. So when it says to authenticate your requests, is to verify if your requests actually have rights to access the API. So I'm going to copy this. I think this is the one I just recently created. It even gives you details of how you can make the request here, how you do it using Bash. This is how you would do it in the Linux terminal. But we're using a different service here, so I'll just put, how would I type it here? I would say bearer, then I type the token. Bearer, then the token like that. And it's just supposed to have 1 space, I think, yes. So that's it. Is there anything else I've left out? You can always check the documentation to verify if there's anything on the nature of the request that you've left out. There's already a demonstration here how you're supposed to do it. It's a GET request, and in the header you're supposed to have authorization. So we have that. Then we're supposed to have a wallet address that we have put as a required parameter in the path. That's it. Then the query parameters were not really required, but if I wanted to get information of the same activity on my testnets, I would simply put testnets, then put it to true, which I think I did. So let's send the request and see if it returns a response for us. So it's sending the request for 02, payment required. So my API keys are coming from an account whose time in trial has expired. It says credit limit exceeded your account. Upgrade your plan of spending limits at growth.dev/platform. But so because I'm going to just continue testing, I'm going to use a different account. I'm just creating another account. Hopefully it doesn't take a very long time. Let me just copy this. So this is how APIs do make their money. So you have to pay for premium services if your period is done. I don't think I have a Gold Rush account here, so I can create an account with this. So this is really the same thing that would happen with most of the other endpoints, rather other API services, indexer services. Although they might have a little bit of differences in how you fetch data from them, but it's really, really close to the same thing. So the thing that would require you to use trial period, so you see now this is a new account. It says trial ends in 13 days. Okay. So I can come to manage my keys. I have one key created for me, and I copy it and change the bearer token on my request here. Taking a while. So this one requires a payment, which I am not planning to make. So I'm just going to change this bearer token to this one. So this one is coming from my new account. So this should work with it. Chain dataset is currently unavailable. Let me try removing this. Try removing the testnets and see if it gets me the mainnets. Also, it gets me the mainnet data. And you can see all the information on Matic. Matic is one of the chains. On BSC mainnet, on Bearer chain, on Plasma mainnet, on Best mainnet. Now I can get all this data and put it into my browser. On Best mainnet, now I have tested that this API actually returns the data that I want. So Best mainnet, what did I want to get? Just a chain ID. Is it a testnet false? I really wanted a chain activity. It did give me chain activity. Or maybe I read the API data wrongly. What does it do? Get activity across all chains for address. Commonly used to locate chains which an address is active on with a single API call. So I don't think it got me what I really wanted. It really simply gives me basic information about the chain. Or I think it demonstrates when I last interacted with these chains. I presume I last interacted with Celo on 25th of December 22nd, 2022. What chain do I think I've interacted with most recently? I think Arbitrum, maybe in January. Yeah, December, I think so as well. 2026, which chain is this? Best? Yes, I think I've done a transaction on Best. I was last seen on the Best chain on 19th. Sorry, this is Best mainnet. I was seen on 19th January 2026. So now we're just going to get this data and bring it into our application using the same fetch request. So everything as we put it the other side is how we're going to bring it here. So this was the API. And so I need to put a wallet address here now. So where am I going to get the wallet address from? I could use a state variable and simply pass in my wallet address. I'm going to call it wallet, then set wallet as the method that is going to modify that wallet. So here I'm going to pass in the default wallet that I'm going to use, which is exactly the same wallet that I want to query this. Okay. So I'm going to paste it here. Now, every time I call wallet address, here in this case, it is going to get me the information that is stored in this variable, this state variable, which is this address. Okay, what method am I going to make what request? That. Then what was supposed to be in the headers, according to what we wrote here, let's first forget the results. In the headers, I'm supposed to put the authorization, and it is required according to the documentation. It is required. If you don't put it, the endpoint doesn't work. We can test it out. For instance, I'm going to make the request when I have clicked the authorization of, let's see, does it work? It says authorization required. It actually warns us. It has to be provided. So I'm just going to copy it as it is, because I actually need it the way it is. Now you could actually store all this information in an env file so that you don't carry it along with your application online. But that's something we'll look at later. Let's first focus on this. So is this a correct way I'm supposed to write it? I think so. Yeah. So that is what's supposed to be in my header. We don't have anything in a body for this specific endpoint. I think this is it for it. We had the authorization, then the authorization, and then the fetch, the path parameter of the wallet address, from as far as I remember. So we had this, and then the parameters, query parameters. We had one, but I passed it manually. So usually here it just demonstrates query parameters, the ones that come after the question mark. But path parameters, you have to manually enter them so that they just become part of the path that you're making the request with. So I think this is it. Then maybe I could modify these results and forget the joke for now and just look at the data in the console. Authorization, and maybe also remove this set timeout function. It served its purpose, so that I get the data in the correct time it's supposed to be delivered to me. Yeah, the most important thing for me right now is for me to see this data in the console. So for this, I'll comment it out. Let's see how it works now. I think our application is this. Yeah, our application is right here. So for us to see this data in the console, we would have to open the console. And there it is. It was just slow, but it wasn't showing. Okay. So this is the application that we have. Now I am going to refresh it and see if my data actually comes back here. So the API is probably making the request and returns the data for us. What does it say? So that's the address. I think this is a lot of information. I need to zoom out. Okay, you can see the response is an object. It has the data. It has the data element. It has an error element, an error message. So it says there was no error. The error code is null and all this information, but everything I want is inside data. When I look at data, there is an array of information under items. So it first shows you that inside this array, which is by the way nested, inside this data object, which is an object inside the object of the response that we got, which is data. Let me zoom this in, it's very critical. When I open it, I have a number of elements. I have the address that I was querying. I have the items array. How do I know it's an array? I can see the array literal here. And inside the array, we have objects, 11 objects. And you can see what it shows here. So I'm going to do something very interesting. I want to display the information of all these chains. And I'm going to display one piece of information first. I'm going to display the name of this data, of these objects inside that are inside the array, and we're going to access them one by one. So we have all the information. How do I know we have the information? Because we can see it in the console inside the object data. So I'm going to get the entire object's data and store it in maybe let me do something like what do I want exactly, because that's the entire result, the object data, which is this one. So inside the object data, there is a value, there's an object, another object inside it called data, and then inside data there's an object called items. So what I'm going to do, I am going to store items in the, let me change this from joke to set joke to set data. Then instead of this being joke, so that it's appropriate, I'm going to call it data. Then change it here as I'm displaying it to data. Did I call it data with a capital D or with a small d? But we're also going to learn something very interesting about React. It does not display objects on the interface. So you have to destructure the objects for you to be able to display them on the interface. So in my loader, you remember what we did with the loader? Said when data is available, display the data. Otherwise, display the propagate loader. Oh my god. I don't know what the error is about. I think I get it. So inside this data object, we have data. Let me call it data info so that we don't get confused. So you remember when we were discussing how information is returned from the fetch request? We said it first returns a data stream from this actual request, and then from the data stream we convert it to a JSON file, which returns this actually returns a promise as well. That's why we go into another den, which returns the data. Then that's the data that you have here. I named it data info, but inside the data object that is returned, reference error set joke. Do I still have joke anywhere? I think I modified it. Let me refresh this. Do I have set joke anywhere? Oh, I still have it here. Set data. So I'm setting this value to the state variable that I declared up here. Set data, set data. So and now I want to go into the specific array that I want. So inside the objects, which I have named data info, let me refresh this first. Line 34. Okay. Why is it not returning the result? Set data. Yeah, didn't modify anything. The wallet address is intact. Is it my internet? I don't know what the issue is now, but I think so. We made a fetch request. This. So, oh yeah, I'm supposed to display data info. I was not displaying the correct information. So that's the data now. So this is the object that I have named data info, this entire object. Why it does it twice is because of, I don't know if it's to be called an issue. It's because of this script mode here. So I'm going to comment it out for now and try refreshing it. So now it should return for me a single result. But you can see the API takes some time. It returns that after a number of seconds. So I can see my data. This is the data object that I have named data info in my app.jsx. Data info. That's the actual object. When I check the object, inside it has another object named data, which is the object that has the information that I want. So it's the object that I want to actually store inside set data. So data. Now that gives me access to this data object. But inside that object, I have an address. Now to verify if that's actually the information that I'm accessing, I'm going to say .address. So I first print this address on the interface and see if it's the actual information. Yeah, let's try that out and see. When I refresh it, it should display my address now. It displays the address. So it's actually the accurate information, correct? So when I come down to, now I want to display the items. Items are in an array, so I want to access this array. And then inside the array, for every single element, I just want to pick out one component, the name of the chain, and see how it displays them. So instead of address, I'm going to display items. I think it's called items. Now this is the purpose of the console. You can always come back to it and reference it before you can write the actual code. Items. Now inside items, so now inside items is an array. So now set data is an array. That's what it means now. It's no longer storing an object but an array. But I want to display very specific information. So let me first, I want the loader to remain. So, but I'm going to demonstrate something here in a new element first. So when you have an array of objects that you want to display on the interface, usually it's recommended that you put them inside a container first. Then inside a container, you write your logic of how you want to display that data. And how you display information from state, we said we use the curly braces, okay? So here, what are we going to access? The data object. Now on the data object, rather on the data array, how do I know it's an array? Because I stored items, which is an array, from the data I returned into the state variable data here. Okay, so now this is the data I'm accessing on the interface. Now, for you to display every information, there's a function on arrays called map. I hope we did it. But the array function called map takes in, like we said, almost every function, every method really takes in a query parameter, rather a callback function. Then here I define a placeholder for each of the elements on the array. Every time we'll loop through them, so I'm going to call it maybe chain. So when I get the chain, what do I do? Now the map function has a number of parameters. One of them is, the very first one is the element itself. Then the second is the ID of the element. So I'm going to put, rather the index. So I'm going to call it index. Now here when I'm displaying them, I can choose how I want them to display. Maybe I want them to display as heading 3s, h3. Yes. This is a little bit different from how you would do it with HTML. So here you would put the value of the element. I don't know how this thing knows what I want to do. So this chain here now is the object. From the array here, each of these elements is an object. So chain is actually an object. Index is just the index of the object. So when you're writing, when you're trying to display an array on an interface in React, in the tag that you're going to display it, here you're supposed to put a key, and the key can be anything. So I chose the index because it's more appropriate. So the index will be the key here. Then on this side I can put the chain. But chain is in this case, chain is an array, and React does not display arrays on the interface, rather objects. So country properties of undefined map. Okay. Now I want to access. Maybe I should first do this so that I can see my object again. You can see the endpoint takes a while. Now I have items here. So what do I want? The specific component I want is the name. So what am I going to be displaying? I'm going to be displaying chain.name. Hopefully now that should work. Country properties of undefined map. Okay, I understand what is happening here. So we're supposed to be waiting on this API to return a certain result. But before it returns the result, there is nothing we can put, there is nothing that is going to be displayed in this area. I hope that makes sense, because we're going to be awaiting on it, but for it to work, we have to, for it to display this information, we have to wait for that information from the API. But before that information returns, then what are we going to be displaying? Where we are supposed to display the chain names. So now that's where we need to put a loader, something that can fill up that space without returning errors as we wait on the response. So maybe let's try to do the same thing we did with up here. So I'm putting another curly brackets because I want to put the what? Because I want to put the propagate loader again. So I would say if data has values, is not undefined, display that. Otherwise display what? Data.map, it should be an array. Unless I miscalculated, but that's something we can always fix. Otherwise display the propagate loader. Expected that, found that. Oh, let me try it and see. Is there an issue? First remove this. Which line is this? Propagate loader. So I want it to only display this div component when there is actually information in the data object. That's what I'm trying to do here. Okay. Otherwise, it would always return errors because, I mean, it has to wait on this data, but when is this data going to come? We're not sure when. So we need to have a way of awaiting for that data before we can execute, before we can return the result. So maybe the first thing I will do, let me put it inside a function. Would that make sense? Maybe I could look at functions later. So now we have perfect syntax that is supposed to return for us an array or information from the chains. Let's verify if this code actually works. Let me first put this here. If this piece of code actually works. So I'm going to hard code an array. I want to hard code an array and then kind of stop the use effect for now and show you that this actually works. Then you can see if the issues somewhere. So we have an array that is supposed to have objects with a chain ID, I guess, or chain name, or name. So I'm going to call this if, then the other, just another name, maybe this. Let's see if this works. Does it actually this? Because this data is already available to us, so it should be able to work. Okay. Maybe we could start with the issue that is with the data itself. It's an H3. Should display the chain name. Chain.name. Okay, this should work. Since use effect isn't working, maybe the issue was actually with the code. Let's first start with the code. Is a container and displays index. Yes. Okay. Let me first put a paragraph here and see if it works. Let me call it chain names actually. Chain names. Okay. Let me try to change this to a paragraph. Use the index. This is also a paragraph. Should display that. Let me try to put this one. That. Why is it not displaying the names? So instead of me using use effect for this purpose, I am going to use it for the single purpose of setting variables to this parameter, to this state variable data. Set data. Okay. Define that now. There's something I'm not seeing. Okay, let me just make this an ordered list perhaps. Let's see what happens if it's an ordered list. Then this would be a list item. It's an array, data is an array. Why? Has to be the return value. Okay. So this is the issue with Redux. It has just a moment. I think I figured out what the issue is. Key index. Did I forget something? Yeah, I think that's it. Let me do it again. Maybe there's something, an error I'm making here and I'm not sure about it. Okay, so that's the map function. It's supposed to have an arrow function. So here, the elements that I bring in, I want them to be list items. Okay, so the very first parameter will be the chain, which represents the entire object. Then the index will probably represent the what? The key would be the index inside here, and then a chain dot name. I don't know what the issue is. Okay, so I wanted to display the map, but maybe I could give it a break for now. And instead of us trying to figure out what the issue is, let's display another piece of data that is accessible to us. So let me first comment this out. So I was able to get the address. Hopefully I'm able to get this back as well. Chain names, then the data. So I was displaying earlier on, I took in the items array and it displayed the item. It didn't display the items. Okay, the next data that I want to probably try displaying let me see if I can get information for Matic because it's in an array, it is index 0. So data, when I get into the data array, I can get into the items array, data object rather. There's an address, then there's items, then at index 0, I can see information for Matic, then at index 0, I want the name of that chain names. So here I'm going to put a heading 3 and see if I can get the data now. Because this data now should be a simple string. It represents a single string, which should be Matic mainnet, okay? So that's the data that I wanted to receive, but in an array. So Matic mainnet, I can see it, it's at index 0. Now I want to get, what I was trying to do is get this array, items, as an array, and then destructure it from here. And it should work. I don't know what I'm missing out. Sometimes it's not very easy to see. Okay, this should work. Let me see if I go to index 2. So this is how you'd actually get the data from a blockchain. It's not a blockchain, but an index that queries blockchain data. Maybe when I was last active on a certain chain, let's see what chain I could look at. Matic still maybe. Now this is the final piece of the data that we have. 0 base category, chain ID, color theme, and all this information last seen at that index when I try to query last seen at, it should give me that date. So it goes back, makes the query again, then when it returns the results, it gives me the time right here. So I can convert this to any timestamp that I want, any time format. Let me try this again. I don't know why it's not working, but it should be able to work. Non-ordered list. Type error, country properties of undefined reading map. Okay. I need to take time and figure out what the issue is, but ideally this should work because it should get me the list of all chains by their names, because this simply represents the objects, the specific objects. Let me see how I can do it, because I'm accessing them in an array, then trying to destructure the array. So let's see, if I got information of just one chain, of course it would come. Now that would be an object, so I'm having an object on the other end. Now that is an object, because at index 0 we have matic, then here I simply access the name. Does that work? Name. So the issue is that I'm working with objects, perhaps. But that was an array. That's name. Okay. This is how reacting. Sometimes not everything displays on the interface, especially objects do not display, and because of this they cause a bit of misbehavior, and this is the issue I'm facing now. So I have to figure out the best way to return the data and pick it in a format that does not have an object along the way. So I think data is an actual objects now, so it won't even display at all. Objects are not valid as React child. Objects with keys, name, blah blah. If you meant to render a collection of children, use an array instead. And that's what I was using earlier, but it still failed. So it's a bit cumbersome, but it should be able to work. I'm not sure why it's not working. Let me see if I use the div. So this is an object, so that's why it wasn't working. Let me take it back to items as an array and see how data would display as an array and how a destructured array would look like here when I'm trying to destructure it. So that this is no longer a div, but maybe an h2. And probably this is also an h2. So what I have here now, items is an array, so I'm trying to destructure it as an array. Country properties of undefined reading map 48. Okay. Anyway, that is how you would fetch data. So I'm going to figure out what the issue is, as I'm saying we're losing time, and then maybe I'll come back tomorrow and go through it. But in the meantime, let's get into another API. I'll figure out what the issue is with this, but it should be able to display that data on the interface for us. So data is an array, so it won't even be able to display here, even if I fetched it. Let's see what happens. Does not work, because inside this array there are actual objects, so they're the ones that will be rendering on the screen along with the array, so it won't display. But if I went inside one of the objects and maybe wanted to fetch specific, maybe block height, that would work as a value of data, because that would be just a simple string, except I don't think we have block height here. Do we? At 0 we don't have block height, but we have a logo URL. Maybe we can actually display the logo. Let's see what happens if we try to display the logo. Logo URL should be able to display for us. What is the word? Logo URL. Okay, that index, which is index 0, the index of polygon, you can get the logo, display the logo as an image on the interface. Let's see how we could do that. I'm going to change this to an image so that it displays as an image. And an image is an incomplete element. So this will display the link, of course, because it's a heading. It's supposed to show you links. IMG. Then here the SRC. What is the source? Source is going to be the URL. So I'll just put the link here better. Let's see if it actually displays the image. Shows me the link. I think it wants to display the image. Maybe it's a simple vector graphic, so it should be able to display. Yeah, maybe let me see if it's actually displaying. We call it the logo. So the logo actually, I think it's just not rendering, but you can see it attempts to display. There is something that pops up there called the logo. I don't know if they're all the same type. I could try out a different image type. Maybe they could display. Or else I would have to take them through an image optimizer. It's possible. White logo URL. Let me try this. I don't know if I would be able to see it because it's white and we have a white background. It's there. So this is the Polygon logo. And it's data we have fetched from the endpoint. This is the logo of Polygon. I could customize it, change its width, change its height, cut it, do whatever I want to do with it. We could try another chain. For the issue of the array, I am going to see how I can fix it. So now, that's index 0. Let's see what's at index 1. That's BNB chain. What's at index 2? Bearer chain. What's at index 3? Which is element 4. Is it still bearer chain? Oh, I didn't change it. Okay. So, but this is how you fetch data from an endpoint. So there's a number of endpoints. Let's see this that display different things. Hello. Yes, please. Okay. Okay, let me try this to be able to work. Okay, let's try this. I would have to change this back to the array because we are using it as an array. Items array, then comment this and this. And still fails. Because I would imagine it's because the endpoint hadn't returned data yet. But then if I was just using it as a different element, it's displaying. So it's something I haven't quite understood why it's not working. But if you allow me, I will look through it and then come back with a solution first thing at 5 tomorrow before we can proceed. So I'll take this back to where we were using it, and I think it was white log everywhere. But there's a lot of other information on this, other sets of information on this endpoint that you could use for different things. So that's one way you could, not one way, but that's how you would fetch information, ideally. Let me first leave it here as we look at something else. Okay, because that would return the logos. Let me say maybe at index 5. It returns the logo of Arbitrum. So at index 5, you can see there is actually Arbitrum, not rather index 6. It's just number 5. Oh, it's actually index 5. Starts at 0. Yeah, that's how you would fetch data. So now I want us to try out a different API, and we'll go into the details of a bit of this, and then we get into the SDKs. Another alternative to using API requests could use actual SDKs. Like we imported React spinners, and yeah, that's what we've been able to do to create a loader. But we'll see what the issue is with what we're trying to do. Now, we're using Convalent. Its API called Goldrush, but there's another one called Seams. This shouldn't take long. Now, Seams is an API of one of the most elaborate services we have for blockchain data indexing called Dune. It has data for quite a number of chains and can be customized in a number of ways. So you saw when we were trying to change this information, there's only a number of things that we could change, the wallet address. But what if I wanted to restrict the activity that I want to check to be on a specific chain, rather than me having to get all the information about all chains? But if I wanted information of just one chain, you see, I should be able to do that. But there's also a number of other endpoints. So that was one of the endpoints. Sometimes you might not find all the information you want on one endpoint, but you can make a batch request with more than one API endpoint, and then be able to combine that data based on the results that you've picked, and be able to use it. And so yeah, now the first one was about activity across all chains. So here I can get multi-chain, multi-address transactions. Let me maybe look at balances. I could get the token balances for an address on different chains. In this case, you can specify the chain name here, and I'll even show you the mechanism with which you can specify these chain names. Here it reads ETH mainnet. So for instance, if I wanted to find out if I have any balances on ETH mainnet, here is the API request. Let me copy this. So it takes in, I'm just going to write it directly here because it should be able to return the results for us. So wallet address still is a parameter, as you can see. So in this request, there's something that might be different from the one that we just touched. So it goes this way, then it goes to chain name. So what is the chain name that I want to check my balances on? Everything else would really remain the same because this is the same API I'm accessing. So chains, if I come to chains, for instance, how would I rate them? List chain status. How would I rate them? API reference. So usually there's somewhere where you can see the reference of how you should write certain things. So I wanted to check the balances, token balances for address. So I'll specify the chain name, and here it reads ETH mainnet, but I want the chain name for maybe base. How would I write base? Because dash balances API. Okay, let me check if mainnet perhaps. If mainnet. So I would type in replacement of chain name, I would type if exactly the way it is because it's a parameter. If mainnet, then the wallet address would be here. Or alternatively, I could have a list of all the chains in the format that has been provided by the API, then maybe put it behind a button with a list so that when someone clicks on a certain chain, it gets the information for that chain with their specific address. So wallet address is the same, so I'm not changing it. And is it also a GET request? Yes, it's a GET request. Are there any required parameters? Authorization is required. We already have it as a bearer token here. Chain name is required. Wallet address is required. Yes. So you can specify the balance in a specific currency. You see this? But this is a query parameter. So I would have to put it as a query parameter right at the end here. So query parameters are written like that. And what is the query parameter? What currency? Currency, because what currency do I want to represent it in? Maybe I want to represent it in US dollars, which would probably be the default, I imagine. But maybe I want to represent it in, fortunately we don't have UGX, in Swiss francs. In Swiss francs. So now I don't know what data I'm going to receive, so I'm not sure what I'm going to receive. So for that purpose, I want to comment this out so that I can first see the data I will receive, then know how to display it. But also commenting it out means I need to comment out everything that was depending on it, including this and that. When I refresh, the request is taken, then data returns for me, which shows me the address, the chain ID, the chain name, the quote currency here. I'm looking for balance, chain tip height, array. The balance is here. So I don't have anything on this chain for this address, so it reads 0. Let me do this as the last thing, then we close up. I want to see if I have any balances on any chain for this address. So if we could see if we can actually see these balances on any mainnet. This is a test network, so let me see. So I'm on Sepolia, but maybe on Base, probably on Base I have. There might be cents, but they're actually a token balance. This is Sepolia. Yeah, I have ETH on. It's really, really little. Maybe if someone has a token balance somewhere and you're sure, you could send me your address and we verify it. Okay. On ETH, I don't have anything. I'm sure on BNB, probably. Okay. Have I sent anyone funds? I sent someone funds. So let me verify if this address I sent funds to has tokens. I sent 20 cents somewhere to an address 303A. I want to copy it. I don't know if this works. So let me just do it on a block explorer and then get that address and check if that address has balances. So I'm going to first see if it has balances on it has some balance on BNB, 0.06 BNB. I don't know how much that is in dollars, an equivalent in dollars. Okay, let me just copy the address anyway. So when I copy this address and come to back to my application. I'm going to change this address to that one. But I want to change the chain ID, rather, yes, the chain name to BSC mainnet. I hope that's how it's written. Because it's not that I don't know, but every chain, rather every indexer has a way it arranges its things. Some would require you to type the name by chain ID. So instead of me typing BSC mainnet, I would have to put the chain ID itself instead of the chain name. So I didn't get the reference for how I should type the names. That's why I'm trying to just guess. I'm doing that because of time. Otherwise, I would have tried to find it. There's somewhere I actually saw it. Let me check. They have an AI too. Chain names list. Should be able to get this to me. Maybe a reference to the actual page where it is. Okay, yeah. So it just got me the names themselves. So the one that I want is actually Best Sepolia Bearer chain. Yeah, but there's a link to where I can find all this information. Supported chains are here. Get all chains. What I'm looking for is Binance Smart Chain, but it's not on the list it has showed me. So let me go to the link it suggested. It also didn't show me supported chains. Maybe let me ask a very specific question. So you can find these on some of the pages, but the information is so much that you sometimes you have to go back and forth for you to find the actual information you're looking for. So Binance Smart Chain. Searching Binance Smart Chain, chain name is. It's BSC mainnet, I was right. So it's typed as BSC mainnet. So I want to find out the information, the balance of this wallet on that chain. So I'm going to make this request again and see what data returns to me. Okay. In Swiss francs, by the way, that's oh, I check Nigerian naira. Okay, in Swiss francs, it tells me what? In Swiss francs, this person has 37 francs. Wow. Okay. In Nigerian naira, let's try to change that to NGN. NGN. So we can actually display this on the interface as well. Nigerian naira, this address has 66,137. I don't know how much this is myself, but is it correct? The quote in 24 hours. I don't know what tokens it's getting. Contract for USDT. Oh, that's for USDT. Oh, it gets for different tokens. Sorry, I was thinking of the native currency. So this is an endpoint I don't think I used myself. I'm just finding this out now. Binance Coin, Injective Protocol. Okay. So it gives you the balances of all these chains. Pretty cool. Now this is the price of the token, I believe, not the actual balance. quoting that. What I'm not seeing is the actual balance. So let's see BSC in USD. I think it's about $900 right now. I want to confirm something about the results. What I was saying might have been the actual token balances, the token prices rather. What I'm looking for is the balances of those tokens. So Binance Coin, BNB, $42. Okay, the information is a little bit unclear. So BSC is $615. Okay. Oh, this is a Binance address, I believe. So probably, usually Binance addresses are shared, and I had a different expectation, so it might actually be accurate. So if you wanted maybe to display pretty quote in 24 hours, how would we reach it? So the object we have is data. So I want pretty quote in 24 hours. The object we have is data. Now I'm trying to put the data back into display. The object we have is data info now. So inside data info, I would access items, which is now you see this is a different endpoint. So the kind of data it's giving me is arranged differently. So I have to modify my interface now. Inside data info, I have items, because I have address, chain ID, chain name, blah blah blah, then address. Then on the address, I'm at index 1. So at index 1, what am I looking for? I'm looking for pretty quote 24 hours. That's the data point that I'm looking for. It's 24H, I believe. Okay, it's $41. So I should see 41.81 here on my data, because that's the value I'm storing in the state variable data here. Now that I'm using it, okay. Let me try refreshing this and see. Undefined one. Items. So you have to be careful. Maybe I'm accessing this wrongly again. Let me attempt to. That. So it's data items, which is an array. Data info items, which is an array. Yes. At index 1, pretty quote 24H. That's it. I presume that's it. So I'm trying to display the data then. Line 33. Okay, so I'll have to figure out how I'm mishandling this data. But this is the back and forth with APIs. You have to be very careful. How the data is arranged is an issue. It's not an issue, but it's something to be careful with to make sure you're accessing the data correctly. Oh, there's actually an array inside called data. Yes, there's an array inside called data. So I was accessing it wrongly, yes. Should be able to display it now. Yeah, $41.81 as you can see there. So yeah, the data is actually being retrieved. Now that was a different endpoint, but that's essentially what we would be doing for APIs. Tomorrow I'm going to look at a specific API, and maybe we'll get into SDKs, but the very first thing I will do is resolve this issue, why the map wasn't displaying. Then we see how we can display the data from an array and have it all onto the interface. There might be something I'm doing wrongly, or maybe there are changes that were made. I'm not sure why, but I'll figure it out. Meanwhile, I think that's a basic start for how we can fetch data from an API. But in this case, since we're doing Web3, we could use only indexers, and sometimes they can return historical data or streaming data, information that is actually happening right now that might actually impact how you interact with your platform. So yeah, that's how you would work with APIs. Unless someone has a question, since the time has really gone, we could stop here for now and see how we can add on to this tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll push this to GitHub, and maybe we could do that. Push it to GitHub, just for us to continue to explore what we did. Oh, I don't have a GitHub repository there yet. No, maybe I will do this tomorrow. So because of time, I'm trying to make sure we close in time. All right, unless someone has a question, I would love to stop here. GitHub repository. Okay, I'm going to share the GitHub repository in the group, or should I do it on my? I could post it after we're done, but it's okay if you want me to do it, I could just do it as well. It shouldn't take long, maybe 10 minutes would be enough. Let me share my screen and do that. Put it into the GitHub repo. So I'll do it in a very simple way. Okay, I don't have an account here. So this should take a very short time. I'm doing it because someone requested. I have a really slow internet. But let me create a new repository. I'm going to name it data index and still. Data indexing. I want a readme file, yes. So yeah, I'm going to clone it. I want to do it in a very fast way so that we don't waste a lot of time. Just a moment. Oh, I did it in the application folder. Oh, but that's okay. me first open it. So I did it in the application folder, but so I'm just going to copy everything here just so we don't spend a lot of time. Put it in this. Yeah. So this should be ready for deploying on. Okay, all our files are there. Okay, we should be able to see this now. Fully deployed. Let me copy this and verify if we actually have it here. Now all the code I have done is actually now here. I'll make the corrections, then push them up. So you can always check out for any updates that I have made. Yeah, so let me share the link in the, you can find the link here, or I'm also going to put it on Telegram. So that's the link to the repository that has the code we've done today, the entire code base. Okay, yeah, I think we could stop here today, then resume tomorrow with a little bit more advanced concepts and also clarifying some of the things that might have not been clear today. Thank you very much for being here today and have a wonderful evening, everyone.